You've got to let go of the time lost. You've got to let go of the anger that you feel toward people who got you involved in this and kept you involved in this. There are things about this religion and the way that it presents itself that keep you tethered to it.
Welcome to Unbound,
A podcast for new atheists
and lifetime atheists,
ex-evangelicals.
truth seekers, and free thinkers.
There is life after faith.
And life here is good. It's time for a new perspective.
And a better conversation. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shelle, and it's time to get unbound.
All right, we're here. We made it. Beginning of a little dream for a little orange spider. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shelle.
And it's time to get unbound. Welcome to Unbound. We are a podcast for new atheists, lifetime atheists, ex-evangelicals, truth seekers, and free thinkers. Whatever category you fall under, or maybe you don't fall under any of them, keep listening anyway. It's going to be fun. So, want to get into the nitty-gritty here. Those of you who have been following us on Facebook kind of have a sort of idea of what we're trying to do here, but I want to give an overview as to what this show is going to be, and hopefully eventually get some feedback from our listeners as to what we should be doing, what we could be doing better, what kinds of topics you want to hear us discuss during the show. We really want to hear from the people who are listening because we're doing this for you. And we want it to be about you. And we want it to be about helping people get their lives back from a religion that can completely and utterly steal it out from under you, regardless of who you are, how smart you are, whatever your brain tells you about this thing that you're involved in. There is just something about it that holds people captive, and many for their entire lives. And I think that we've seen enough of that. I've witnessed enough of it. I've been part of enough of it. And let's just say I've reached a point where I've just gotten fed up enough to actually do something about this and not just sit around and complain about it. So basically, I started thinking a few weeks ago about how I wanted to approach this because I know what the problem is. I wasn't sure how to approach dealing with it in this kind of a format. So that's where the whole bit with new atheists, lifetime atheists, ex-evangelicals, truth seekers, and free thinkers comes into play, because I think that all of these groups of people working together can bring about understanding about the religions that fall under a couple of different specific covers. But I think that all of these groups need to work together to ensure that the messaging of these religions doesn't continue to permeate the culture the way that it is. And I'm guessing that there are going to be a good number of people listening to this podcast that don't even know all the ways that evangelical thinking has already permeated the culture and what it can do long term if it's left unchecked. That's a real problem that we are going to be addressing through a bunch of different avenues and a bunch of different topics. So sitting across the table from me is my co-host, my wife of 26 and some years, and almost 30 years to the day that we've been a couple. Just as a matter of fact, you're going to be hearing this on or after December 1st. So yeah, December 10th is the big day.
Yes, the
30
big
years.
snowstorm day.
The big snowstorm day, the day that we became a couple, we became us. And yeah, we actually did months before, but I think December 10th was the day that we admitted it.
Yeah.
I think that's fair enough to say.
That's about right.
Yeah. So Shelle was actually one of the very first people that I met at Valley Forge. So I really would like to know, and I'm sure that our listeners would also like to know, what turned a nice Episcopal girl evangelical in the first place?
A guy.
Oh, dear. Okay. I think I know this story.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was a freshman in high school, and this boy was paying attention to me, and he invited me to his youth group, which, by the way, was right across the street from where I lived. And
How
so I
convenient.
decided to go, and I really liked it. It was different than anything I'd ever been to. It was just a lot of fun. And I said, well, and a little later I got saved, and there my troubles begin.
But what were the circumstances there? Like, there's always a huge amount of emotionalism, sensationalism, and coercion with these things. So, what was it that did it for you? There was something in that atmosphere, whether it was eloquent words, whether it was pretty music. What was it that was going on in your head?
It was the music. There was just a lot of emotion in there. And, as a kid, I enjoyed Episcopal Church. I really liked all of the music there too. But at the same time, there was just a lot more emotionalism. And at the time, it just seemed like it had a deeper meaning, a deeper connection to what I thought Jesus was.
Oh, I get that completely, because that was pretty much what got me finally to go down to the altar at that Bible camp, was the fact that it was being presented from an angle that was so unique that my brain took to it immediately. And that I guess I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's the way that I see it now.
Yeah. I got saved at a Christmas cantata. So that's
Tell people what that is.
That is like a musical retelling of the Christmas story done by usually a choir. It's not like a pageant. It's just basically a chorale where it's all singing.
Discount
all
Les
Christmas.
Mis.
Pretty much, yes. Our church did get a little more theatrical later on. We did a Pentecostal version of A Christmas Carol. It was a lot of fun doing it, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, you don't want to have ghosts, so you're just going to have angels.
Of course.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was mainly the music. I was very involved in the music ministry of the church. I didn't lead anything, but I was always like right there whenever there was a choir or teen talent, which they call something else now. I can't remember what they call it. I was always right there when there was a musical thing going on, or if there was a concert or something that people were going to.
I was very involved with church music too, from pretty much the time that I was allowed, and that basically was when the guy who I consider to be my youth pastor showed up at the church, and all of a sudden, I came out of my shell. I had been sitting around just doing nothing at the meetings, meeting some people, and so yeah, I was always very involved with the music ministry. Whatever church I was in, it was just a thing. It never took long for me to show up at a new church and either have the music ministry handed to me or be playing a pretty big role in that. And even at the time, I understood the psychology of the music, and I understood why we were doing what we were doing. I didn't obviously think of it as manipulative at the time, but let's just call it what it is. You're using art to elicit emotion. You're trying to use the music to augment the tone of the service at that time. So when you've got impressionable kids who are basically standing there inside their heads at a crossroads, you start playing some pretty music, and all of a sudden they start thinking in the direction that you want them to think. Well, the same thing happens in your average worship service at any kind of Pentecostal evangelical church. Always very, very energetic at the beginning. has a tendency to then kind of mellow out a little bit, because now it's like we kind of want your brains a little bit more mushy. And we want you to be able to be in a better place to receive all of this wonderful indoctrination that we're going to hand you for probably the next hour and a half. And yeah, there's a lot of power with music, and I'm certain that the music often has a lot more to do with how many people show up at the altar than the actual message or whether or not they believe it, because so many people wind up at the altar at a meeting on Saturday and still can't be bothered to get themselves out of bed for church on Sunday, because in the interim, those emotions kind of settle and they start thinking a little bit more rationally again. And if you do not strike while the iron is hot, then you're not going to get the results that you want from these people. So the worship needs to be on point. The music needs to be relevant. And there has to be a certain formula to it, depending on what you are trying to accomplish. And I knew this then. I didn't see it as manipulation then. I just saw it as this is the way that the Holy Spirit chooses to move in this particular setting. And people respond to it because they're motivated by the Holy Spirit, not by their own emotions. I knew that there was an emotional aspect to it, but I don't know, maybe just for my own conscience, because I said many times that I was always smarter than this religion, and there was no reason why I should have been in it so deep, but there were just things, and I knew precisely what I was doing, but I didn't look at it as manipulation at the time. I looked at it as I was doing something in a way that was effective, and I was moving as the Holy Spirit led me. And, you know, I don't fault anybody for thinking that, because, as I've said many times before, I have always been too smart for this. And yet it managed to keep me for more than 2 decades, almost 25 years. So getting back to my co-host, days following that, your conversion experience, what was done to try and keep you in the fold, if anything at all?
Well, it was mostly just everybody just being real nice. Just like showering me with love, which wouldn't be bad if, you know, it was, I can't say it wasn't genuine, but I can say that it all had a purpose. That's the way you keep people. You draw them in with outside things like that, but if there's no display of, oh, we want you here, we want you here, we accept you here, you belong here with us, then nobody's going to stay. And I had always been kind of one of these people who got fixed on something and stuck with it for a long time. Yeah, I had my doubts, but at the same time, I was like, but I feel something here I haven't felt before. And, you know, I was 14 years old. There's a lot I haven't felt before.
Yeah, no, and I get that too. And that kind of leads me into another story. The very first time that I was at an actual Pentecostal service, because the church group that my mother was really heavily involved in before that, it was such a mixed bag of people from a very specific religious community in the Hudson Valley, and very nice people. I remember, even at as young an age as it was, probably 6, 7 years old at that point, I remember what these people were like, and I just remember warmth and community and all kinds of good things, positive things. But of course, at that age, you don't understand all the grown-up stuff that's happening too. And there was a lot that was going on behind the scenes with this church and the leadership and all of that. And it eventually basically imploded on itself. And that it's an example of what happens when you decide you're going to branch out and try to reinvent the wheel. You get a lot of disagreement among the ranks. That's where different denominations come from, is when those disagreements surface. Well, when it's just a small church with less than maybe 50 or 60 people, that's not what happens. What happens is that this thing just vanishes into obscurity. And there's a lot to be learned from that and the psychology behind it and why it happens. But I do remember a few years later, I mean, it feels like more because I was young, but it really was only a few years later, maybe 4, 5, 6 years later at the absolute most. I'm not sure precisely how it happened, but we wound up reconnecting with some of the people from that church organization. And they were attending a church in Hopewell and invited my mother and me to come. It had been a long time since we had all worshiped together, and we all thought that this would be an interesting thing. And I remember my first impression of it. Number one, you've got what they called their minstrel band up in front, and we're talking 12, 13 people with all kinds of instruments, guitars, keyboards, all kinds of folk instruments. And if they couldn't really play an instrument, but they still wanted to be up there, they were like shaking tambourines or whatever. But the music was incredibly lively. They sang every song over and over and over and over and over again. And you know what? There's a psychology to that too. There's a reason why it's difficult to not sing along with certain songs. There's a reason why it is difficult to not start tapping your foot or want to start dancing. And the psychology behind that is something that Pentecostal evangelical churches really, really, really tap into. And again, just like what you were saying, the very first thing that impressed me about that church was the music.
Yeah.
And beyond that, I just, I don't remember anything else. All I remember is going up to my mother's friend afterward and him asking me what I thought and me telling him, I've never felt closer to God than I did today.
Yeah.
I can't even tell you what the sermon was about. I can't tell you anything that happened after that music service was over.
I don't remember any sermons from my time in the Pentecostal church. I remember none of them. None of them. And I took notes.
Thank your lucky stars.
I took notes, but it's the music. I have a bunch of songs in my head. And those songs are there, but the words aren't, not as much. Oddly enough, I remember some of the homilies from Father John.
I liked Father John.
Yeah.
We, after our long stint in Pentecostal evangelicalism, we did sort of taper off at the end there, didn't we? We wound up going to a church that was still evangelical, but not overly demonstrative.
Yeah.
And I was pretty much heading the music ministry there too for a while.
And I was Joe's wife.
And that was
and I
it.
Was always Joe's wife.
Yep. And they were very cliquish.
Yeah.
I was liked because I had talent.
Yeah.
And that was it. And
I really didn't want to go anymore. I was like, you know what? This is all just so much junk. It was just junk. By the end, I just had totally fallen out of love with the whole Pentecostal experience. And I had decided, you know what? I just want to go back to Episcopal Church. I want to go back to Episcopal Church and sit down and know what I'm doing.
Was it you or me that suggested that first? I forget.
It was me.
Yeah?
It was me. I was like, I am not going back to another one of these crazy churches where I'm ignored constantly and never feel a part of.
Yeah. That was a problem in most of the churches that we were involved in. I mean, let's not even think about the first one. And guess what? I really, really do hope that certain people do catch wind of this, because I would really, really love for certain people that I worked with back in that time period to hear some of my thoughts about them and their just vile way that they treat people. Yeah. I really do hope that some of the people from back in the day hear this and understand that certain wounds run very, very deep. I've said that I don't hold charge against anyone in my life who tried to help me, but there were also people who were part of this religion who went out of their way to hurt me.
Yeah.
And we'll get into topics like forgiveness a little bit later on, but suffice it to say, I feel like as an atheist, I look at forgiveness in a much, much different way now. I feel like there has to be a meeting of the minds for forgiveness to take place. And people will disagree with me on that. There are certain things that I have made myself let go of. I consider that to be different than forgiving. Forgiving is a contract between two people, between the person who was offended and the offender. That's an entirely different thing than just simply deciding to put something aside and move on. That is more of a personal decision, I think, than forgiveness, because forgiveness also takes the other person into account and provides them with closure. So you are making the conscious decision when you forgive someone to provide them with closure over that situation. Whereas in the case of a lot of these people that I'm talking about right now, there never was any closure. It was just me making an intellectual decision that it was time to move on from that. And if it was ever appropriate to deal with it again, then I would. Hi. You know what I mean? Here we are, and I'm going to be dealing with it not directly, not pointing fingers at people and saying this person did this and this person did that, but you can rest assured that I will draw on stories, and I will draw on examples, and I will draw on experiences that came out of that time and tell the story in a way that's going to help everyone and not just be some cathartic thing for me. And that's my promise. I don't want this to be about me. I want it to be about everyone finding points of relatability and understanding that we've been through a lot of the same things. So let's kind of bring this full circle just for a couple more minutes before we move on to something else. We talked a lot about the influence of music. What else was there about this that kept you for so long? Because I can remember a couple of times voicing a few concerns and you responding to it with basically fear and panic, which is precisely what they want.
Well, that's what kept me they showed us those stupid Thief in the Night movies. And I took those really seriously because everybody else around me was taking them very seriously. And I had never heard this particular narrative before. And it was terrifying. It was terrifying. And I was terrified about 90% of the time. And I thought there was something wrong with me. Not, above the fact that I had severe anxiety and depression, but I was also constantly afraid of screwing up or losing my salvation, because that was a real thing that people said, oh, she's backsliding. Oh, this person did this, and, we'll have to pray for her that she comes back. And I'm like, this all terrified me. I did not have good self-esteem, and I had no confidence in my own abilities, and it kept me where I was for 20 whatever years it was. It just kept me there because I couldn't do anything else, and I was scared to leave, and I was scared to question.
And that's the thing. The religious systems, I'm trying hard to wrangle in my pronouns here because I want to be consistent in my own messaging. But this system is rooted and built up on the concept of fear. They use fear to collect you, and they use fear to keep you. Now, there are some that play this angle more than others. There are some that are a little bit less fire and brimstone, but it all comes back to the same thing. It all comes back to you're going to adopt their way of thinking because you are now afraid to think any way else, because you are afraid of consequences that you will not suffer until you're dead. Here's the thing. When you're dead, you're dead. It's the great equalizer. There are no consequences for anything after death, good, bad, or indifferent. And I know it's a really, really heavy concept, especially for a new atheist, but it's one that I personally have found absolutely necessary to get past, okay? I'm not going to heaven. I'm not going to hell. When I die, where am I going? Unless San Junipero is an option at that point, I'm going nowhere. And when I'm nowhere and I'm no one and I am nothing, I can do nothing. Well, guess what? This voice, this body, alive and kicking right now, I can do something right now. And right now, I choose to use my time and my effort and a little bit of my own money to get this podcast going so that I can finally start telling my story and hopefully find other people out there with points of relatability who want to tell theirs. And that is an eventual direction that I want to bring this show. I want to interview people who have come out of evangelical faith and get their perspectives on it too, just like we just did with Shelle. And I think you've gotten a really good idea of what my story looks like. And I've done more, a little bit more, I guess, than you have, but you've been there through all of it. Yes. So whether or not it was your thing or you were there supporting my thing or whatever it was, you have a lot to say. And I definitely want to make sure that people get your perspective, mostly because I can't tell this story from a female angle. I can't tell this story from the angle of a woman who is in a religion that hates her. I can't, because it doesn't treat me the same way. No. It intimidates me, but it insults and degrades you. Right. And it really, the way that any Abrahamic religion approaches women is repugnant. It is absolutely and utterly repugnant. But when you're in the middle of that culture, for whatever reason, women just seem to accept that this is their role. Why that's a thing, why they make the conscious decision to do it in the first place, I can't really wrap my own brain around. I only know why I did it, but I also know that my reasons probably way different than any girl's reasons would have been at 13 years old too.
Well, yeah. I mean, you learn in church school that this is what happens. Even in the Episcopal Church, which is a lot more equitable between men and women than most Christian denominations are, you still learn that, Eve was the one who caused the fall. You still learn that. It isn't quite as driven home than it is with the Pentecostals, but it's still there. And it's also in our culture, because our culture is so steeped in Christianity especially, that we have to have a debate on whether women and men get equal rights. For some reason, this is still a debate.
No,
I don't know.
Yeah, it amazes me how we still think about certain things in the year 2019. It really boggles my mind why more women have not just stood up and said, don't you people understand that the way you treat us in this religion is disgusting and we are done? When does that happen? What has to happen? How many women have to find themselves in relationships with men who treat them like less than chattel before they start just saying, okay, you know what, I've had enough of this? When does that happen? For a lot of them, it never happens because it's so ingrained in their thinking that this is what their role is. Yeah. That some of them don't even see anything wrong with it. You look at their lives and it's appalling. But if you dare to say that it's appalling, like, what do you mean?
You'll have 15 other women telling you that you are wrong because they have been raised in it. This is what they know. This is all they know. And that's just how it is for them. And they will tell you that you are wrong and they will shout you down. I have been shouted down before. It is not a fun experience. And yeah, you want to avoid it because it's just like, this is too much for my day.
Pentecostal religion was too much for mine. And that's kind of a curt way of expressing a much more complex thought. But I myself got very fed up with a lot of the male attitudes toward women and some of the things that were said, even when they were said in jest, even when it was supposed to be funny. I don't care what kind of spin you want to put on it. Insulting and degrading someone is never funny, whether they're in on it or not. Just keep that shit to yourself. Okay, seriously, just keep it to yourself. I got very upset a few times at some of the things that I saw on a lot of the ways that some of these men treated their wives right out in front of everybody. And you could see that there was this superiority thing going on where you've got the master and the subservient. You could tell that that was what their relationship was. And whether or not she was satisfied with it or not, I really couldn't tell you, because most of those people had the most vacant, neutral expressions on their faces all the time that it was difficult to tell what was going on in their head emotionally. I think that happened. Now, the funny thing is, I can remember very, very early on, maybe 6 months or so after I had gotten saved, we wound up going on a trip to Florida, and I can remember being in this restaurant with my mother. And obvious, very obvious evangelical family sitting at a table close by. And I remember remarking about the looks on their faces. And my mother looked at me and she said, "That's the look of confidence, knowing that your future is set." No, that's the look of people who haven't had an independent thought in a lot of years. That's really what it is. Everything that they do, everything that they say, the way that they do it, it just oozes of pride and arrogance. And then they have the audacity to turn around and tell you, okay, now you have to lay aside these parts of your personality and just sort of let us be us because we're the leaders here. And we're going to give you the worst possible examples of how you should be living. But God forbid you emulate anything you see us do in front of us, because there's going to be judgment up the yin yang. It's crazy and it's frustrating, and it's why we're doing what we're doing. So let's move on a little bit from here. I want to talk a little bit about my experiences, just in a few more minutes, tell you about my salvation experience, and we'll take it from there. Got a couple of other things to cover, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do with the rest of this show, what I'm really hoping to accomplish with this podcast for new atheists, lifetime atheists, ex-evangelicals, truth seekers, and free thinkers. What does that mean? Well, we're going to find out in just a little bit. A little bit about me, my experience, the very first steps into this thing called evangelical religion. Good Catholic boy, 13 years old, looks at a brochure for a camp in upstate New York. Well, this camp looks very interesting. It also happens to be a Bible camp. Well, I'm not intimidated by the fact that this is a Bible camp, because my 13 years as a little Catholic boy, I was perfectly okay with the concept of Jesus. I already believed in Jesus, thought I already knew everything I needed to know about Jesus, had been told from the time I could understand that my soul was secure because I was a Catholic. So this camp, it looked really, really nice. And honestly, I was just looking... I was looking at it from much more of an aesthetic level than I was from a spiritual level, but I also have always had an interest in other points of view, especially when it came to things like spirituality and religion. And I knew that this was not a Catholic camp. I knew that I wasn't going to be engaging with Catholic youth here. I had already gone through CYO. I had already gone through a couple of different things with the Catholic Church. And even after this experience, I had remained a little bit plugged in for another couple of years, but not to the extent where I was going to Mass every week anymore. But 13 was a turning point. August 4th, 1985. I'm sitting in a room in a big pavilion with hundreds of people around, and this well-meaning older gentleman telling the story of. It was the tax collector and the Pharisee. And this person went on to spend about a half an hour telling us about why our lives were not clean. Now, keep in mind, we are talking about a room full of people whose oldest age is probably 17 or 18 years old and being told how their lives are unclean. That first night was interesting, very, very interesting, because I remember listening to this guy drone on for forever about the uncleanliness of the human soul. And it was the very first time that I had heard this message presented in this way, in a way that had more of a call to action. Because, I mean, the Catholic Mass, if you listen to the liturgy, it's nothing but a string of calls to action that you just get used to following. So it wasn't that far out of the ordinary for them to do what they did next, but the notion of me having to now do something that was profoundly physical in terms of what should happen during a mass or a church service, because it was one of those situations where, and a bunch of you know where this is going already, where the guy running the meeting that night, the preacher who was running the meeting, giving what is called an altar call. Now, if anybody is not familiar with what this is, it's when they tell you, everybody in the room, to bow their heads, close their eyes. We want every head bowed, every eye closed, no one looking around. That's a mantra. That is a mantra in this religion. Every head bowed, every eye closed, nobody looking around. Now, just wait, it gets better. So, of course, I'm thinking about everything that I've been told. I'm realizing that I've never heard it from this perspective before, and that there seemed to be more depth to it than what I had been brought to believe in the past. I saw something in it, and I responded to it. When they asked who wanted to accept Christ as their Savior, I raised my hand. But the physical aspect of it, I mean, I was okay with raising my hand because I spent the last 13 years standing up, sitting down, kneeling down, sometimes kneeling down for communion, doing all the things that you're supposed to do as part of the liturgy. So it didn't bother me to be asked to raise my hand. What bothered me was what happened next. Everyone who raised their hand was then asked to get up from where they were sitting and make their way down to the altar. For a lot of you, this sounds real familiar, and for a lot of you, you've done it, 10, 20, 30, 50 times because you've convinced yourself that you're just not good enough and you keep asking over and over and over again for your salvation. Okay, I know that there's plenty of you out there that relate to that. This was my first of many sorry trips to the altar too. Okay, but it didn't just happen. Like, everyone was looking around at this point. People were starting to go down to the front. I didn't really want to go down to the front. It really wasn't something that I wanted to do that night. But apparently, every head bowed, every eye closed, and no one looking around only applies to the people that you're trying to trap. Because there was my counselor right behind me on the bleachers, hand on shoulder, holding on to his New Testament, and saying to me, I just wanted to let you know that I saw that you raised your hand. And if you're afraid to go down by yourself, I would love to accompany you so that you can accept Jesus. And I looked at him, and my rational mind from not day one, but minute one with this was, but didn't I already accept Jesus? Wasn't that what the prayer was for? Why do I have to do this? Well, that was explained. It was explained before the altar call, and it always is. And then there's the classic verse about, if you confess me before men, I'll confess you before my Father who's in heaven. Can you look up that verse for me, just so I know what it is? I want to give people the reference for it. Okay. Just BibleGateway.com, and if you confess me before men, that's all you're going to need to put in, and you'll get the KJV. And definitely read the KJV when you find it. So there's that part about, if you confess me before men, I'll confess you before my Father. If you deny me before men, I will deny you before my Father. And is it a gift or isn't it? I was just told that this was a gift. I've never given someone a gift that was contingent on how they chose to use it. Okay? Either it's a gift or it's not. what I was being offered that night didn't really sound very much like a gift. And that thought plagued me for a long time after. And it was something that I always came back to. Did you find it?
Yeah.
What does it say?
But whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven. Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I come not to send peace, but a sword. I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law.
Interesting to me that they didn't read the rest of that to us when they were telling us how important this was. It wasn't even in the same context. It wasn't in the context of, okay, now I have to do something visible and demonstrable here. How many of you have ever had your neighborhood disrupted by an outdoor church service? It happens here all the time, all summer long, every Sunday. Fortunately, I work at my job selling weed on Sunday, so I don't have to hear that shit. That's a good thing. But you guys, you need to decide which way you want it to be, because on the one hand, it's confess me before men, confess me before, let your light so shine, be a city on a hill. And yet there's also the verse that talks about not being like the hypocrites with their what does it say? Don't be like the hypocrites with your vain repetitions and pious ramblings and all of that. There are so many contradictions. Like, what should I be doing here? Should I be getting up out of my seat and going down and making a public confession? Or should I be doing what it says in this other place and keeping it to myself? That's the real question. I never got an honest or coherent answer to that one. And I started asking questions right away. And also started getting hit with the whole business of, well, there are certain things in life that just require faith. No, there are not. There are certain things in life that require proof, and this is one of them. So had I stood up for what I knew and understood at that time, things might have gone a little bit differently during that week. But here's the thing. And this, I think, is why most people get involved with these religions. It's not so much about the religion. It's not so much about the concept of I don't want to go to hell, because with all due respect, I don't think there are very many people out there, Christian, non-Christian, or anything in between, who honestly, truly, legitimately believe in something like hell. And I'll get into my reason for that on another episode. But I don't think that even your most devout Christian really honestly believes in a place called hell, or heaven for that matter. It makes you feel good to think about these things. And that really is what it boils down to. Religion makes you feel better about the fact that you're going to die. But it also, the more nefarious ones out there threaten you with bad things happening to you after death if you don't follow theirs. Amazing to me how the reward and or punishment is always something that you don't have a snowball's chance in hell at ever seeing during your lifetime. You have to just accept that these things are going to happen after you die, and that's that. Well, bullshit. No, you don't. You can and should require proof of anything that someone tells you that is going to change or alter the course of your life. You need proof that what they are telling you is true. You don't need just a momentary fear of, oh my God, I don't want to go to hell. Well, who does? Based on what we know about this fictional place from the fictional sources where any thought of this ever sprung from the first place, who would want to go to hell? But I think that what happens is people, they accept Christ because they either A, get scared into it, and that's what happened with my grandmother, or they are looking for acceptance. They're looking for something that is going to fill a void. Now, for me, I had loads, even at 13 years old, I had loads of voids and had a lot of trouble feeling accepted because I had certain physical issues when I was growing up. I had had 7 operations between age 2 and age 14 to correct clubbed feet, and that put a damper on me having a normal childhood. So yeah, I mean, I get the need for acceptance. I was somebody that desperately needed acceptance at that point in his life. And when I arrived at that camp, I instantly found it. Now, I don't think that these people were putting on airs. I don't think that they were being insincere. I think that of the groups of people that I interacted with during that time in my life, these were some of the most genuine. They really, really were. They were nice people. They were legitimately nice. No one ever asked me for anything except to walk down to that altar. That was all I was ever asked for. Maybe toward the end of the week, I was asked to give a little money for their missions project, but it wasn't even a daily thing that we were asked for money. So they were giving and giving and giving, and I was receiving and receiving and receiving, and it all just seemed so wonderful. And that entire week, of course, I'm riding on this major high. I had made a very good decision. These were the types of people that I wanted to hang around with. And bonus, I was going to get to spend forever with them. So, there was that. Well, it didn't take long until I started running into a few Christians that I really didn't quite want to spend eternity with. I found that there was just as much unacceptance as there was acceptance. I started learning some really harsh truths and realities about the nature of people. And over time, yes, I started getting a little bit more cynical, but I was bound and determined to make sure that I continued in my belief. It was important to me to be the type of person that at least tried to walk the walk, as it were. I wanted to do this Christianity thing in a way that was going to be truly personal. And I didn't want to worry about the way other people approach their faith. And I did manage for a good long time to just worry about me and not worry about the jerks that showed up at youth group once in a while, because sooner or later they would disappear anyway. And the sooner the better. And almost all the time when somebody decided they were going to make trouble with the youth group, they didn't last long. No one kicked them out or anything. It just got boring because we were a cohesive group. And when it became apparent that they weren't going to fit in, they quickly found better things to do. We never excluded anybody, just for the purpose of excluding. But there were people that excluded themselves with their attitudes toward other people in the group and whatnot. And, the long and the short of it is the acceptance angle wore off quickly. I had to find other reasons to be part of this. And I've always been a doer. I've never been the type that liked to sit in the pew and watch the service. I wanted to be part of it. And my wanting to be part of something within the realm of Christianity, so I could say I was doing something with my faith, kind of led me to my the first youth group meeting. And it was very, very no frills. Okay, all right, let's just admit it. There was a girl that I liked, and this was her youth group. And I was invited, and I said, oh, sure, well, of course I'm going to go. And but then, oddly enough, got there, and within maybe the first half hour or so, got really caught up in the charisma of this youth pastor. And I didn't know it at the time, but he already had one foot out the door at that church. So I got to attend youth group under him for maybe, I want to say it was 3 or 6 months, and then he was gone. Not gone. He just went to another church, and I did interact with him for years after, but not in any real meaningful way. He was my quote-unquote first youth pastor, but the one that came in after was my youth pastor, okay? So not to get too far ahead again, the camp was very mainline Baptist. The youth group was Pentecostal. Now, at the time, I didn't really understand that there were so many differences. I had gotten, quote unquote, saved at camp, and then went to this Pentecostal church and started hearing things that I then brought back to camp the following summer, and had people looking at me like I had lobsters crawling out of my ears, okay? I got yelled at more than once for saying things that I had learned from the pulpit of my Pentecostal church. And it started becoming apparent that there were definite factions out there, that there were people that not only believed different things than other people, but were very militant about those differences and gathered identity from those differences. It was amazing to me just how emotional some of these people got over someone saying things that they agreed with in one breath and things they didn't in the next, and things they agreed with in the next. They just didn't know how to approach that. They didn't know how to remain civil. One thing about your average evangelical is they're not very good debaters. They have their opinions that were ingrained in them from the time that they could understand. They never had cause to question it. And now all of a sudden they're hearing things that go counter to what they believe. And some of them just, they can't handle it. And that was what I was seeing a lot of. Year 2 at that camp was way different than year 1, because walking in there as a born-again Christian was a much, much different thing than walking in there as some wet behind the ears Catholic kid the year before. Because I had seen things, I had started developing a sense of what I believed, and then had some of these people just completely tearing my beliefs, my very new beliefs, limb from limb, with the intent of replacing them with their own. And that was just another thing. There were so many warning signs, so many canaries in this coal mine. And as they all died off one after another, I persisted. And, you know, I'm a smart person. It bothers me that 25 years of my life was taken away by this religion. But what bothers me more is that I know that I was always smarter than the decisions that I made. So why did I make them? Well, it came back to a number of different things. Number one, I was convinced that God was out there, that he was interacting with me, that he had his own opinions about what I was supposed to be doing. And these thoughts followed me way, way further than they ever should have. 3 weeks into my college experience, and I knew that I just didn't want to be there. And I knew that I would never be able to see eye to eye with the vast majority of the people that I was going to school with, that it was just never going to be a thing. And yet I stayed with that for another 25 plus years. And there are reasons. There are reasons why smart people make the stupid decision to stay in an evangelical religion. It's not that you're stupid. It's not that you got duped into anything. There's a psychology behind what these people do that we are also going to be getting into in depth as we continue this journey. But just keep in mind that it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how well you can see through the facades. There are things about this religion and the way that it presents itself that keep you tethered to it. And it's done in ways that range from really, really obvious to really, really, really subtle. And most of it is somewhere in the middle. And the somewhere in the middle is what I want to address in later episodes, and then kind of branch it out into those fringes so that you see what the purposes are behind a lot of the things that they do. Why is it necessary for you to respond to that altar call? Why do you need to be baptized? Why, if salvation is a free gift, do you have to do all of these things to have it and maintain it? And that's another thing that I got yelled at the second year back at that camp. Was there's a clear difference in opinion between what salvation is among Baptists and among Pentecostals. My very first exposure to this was an ideology that said that once you accepted Christ, that was it. You were saved forever. Once saved, always saved is the way that they put it. And then you get the evangelicals who believe with absolutely no credible biblical basis at all that God is somehow sitting there with this tube of ecclesiastical whiteout waiting to erase your book from the Lamb's Book of Life if you fuck up just a little bit. So there was a lot of back and forth. And what it does to your head, the questions that it raises and just suspends there in your head, are the things that keep you going back, because you start getting determined to find answers. And you keep being promised answers. Week after week, you're promised that you're going to receive answers. Answers to your prayers, answers to questions about your life, answers to problems that can only be solved through prayer. They promise you answers and never, ever, ever deliver one, because the moment they do, there's no reason for you to come back. And that right there is one of the biggest problems with this religion. There are so many more. And I'm going to try really, really hard to not speak in superlatives and not speak in hyperbole. I'm going to get caught a lot. But, suffice it to say, with the stuff that I've seen, and as angry as it's made me, I feel like it's so much easier and so much better to learn to just let certain things go. And there's a lot about this religion that hurts people. It hurts individuals. It hurts families. There's so much hurt that this religion exacts on society. Maybe this particular setting can be a place that exposes it, but does it in a way that provides alternatives. Because, I got hurt a lot. I got hurt a lot in this thing. But I learned, and it took time. It took a lot of time. This wasn't something that just happened overnight. I learned that there comes a point where you just have to let go. And I've put that in a couple of the promos. You got to let go of the hurt. You've got to let go of the time lost. You've got to let go of the anger that you feel toward people who got you involved in this and kept you involved in this. Most of the people that I encountered through my Christian walk had the best possible intentions for what they were doing and what they thought they were doing for me. I cannot harbor anger for any of them, toward any of them. There were a few along the way that I think had a few ulterior motives, and you people know who you are, and fuck you. But for the most part, the people who were in my life and influencing me at that time, they were doing what generations before them had taught the generations after them to do. None of this was individual. None of it was original. None of it came out of a certain person's head. It was all stuff that had been planted there by generations of indoctrination. So if you're harboring anger toward someone who tried to get you into this and succeeded, or toward a pastor who every single time you went and told him that you wanted to quit this thing, convinced you to keep with it, instead of getting angry at these people, be angry at the system that created them. What they do isn't all their fault. Forget what you've been taught about free will. Forget that these people have their own choices to make. Sometimes our ability to make those choices gets circumvented by things that are shoved into our heads when we're young. And a lot of these people got saved at insane ages like 2, 3, and 5 years old, before you should even be able to think about things like death and your own mortality and eternity, these massive concepts that no 2-year-old could possibly understand. But the messaging has been put in their heads since they were a week old, and indoctrination starts that early on. And when it starts that early on, what's the defense? How do you as an individual defend against that? At that point, it's not entirely your fault if you turn around and start telling people that God wants them in Bible college, because someone turned around to that person and pulled them out of engineering school and said, God wants you in Bible college, and they went. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be basically the John Grisham of my generation. I wanted to have the successful practice, but also be able to have the creative outlet. That was number one and number two my entire growing up. I can remember as early as 2nd or 3rd grade being asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I always said I want to be a writer or I want to be a lawyer. And then at 15 years old, I was told that I was supposed to go to Bible college by someone that I trusted. And it's difficult. It's difficult not harboring resentment. But this person, when I think about the interactions that I had with him over the years that I knew him and was close with him, I can't come up with a single example of a time where I felt manipulated, where I felt like he said anything to me that had any kind of ulterior motive. It goes right back to what I was talking about before. He did what he believed to be right. He believed that God wanted me in Bible college. Why? Because he saw that I had a particular talent, that I was well-spoken, that I was able to do pastoral things, that I would be a good public speaker, that I would be a charismatic speaker and presence at the pulpit. He saw these things, and just in his head, God told him that I needed to go to Bible college. Well, when presented with it as a first concept, I wasn't terribly enthused. But then there were other things that happened along the way, and I want to get into I want to get into the night that I got quote unquote called into the ministry when we start talking about glossolalia, because the two have so much to do with each other that I want to wait until that part of the story. Then I want to fast forward a few years, and I'm going to set foot on the campus of this little Bible college outside of Philadelphia that I will not mention. Because again, I don't want to get sued, and but that's okay. They're going to know who I'm talking about, and they're going to know who I am sooner or later. I'm waiting for the letter rescinding my useless degree. I'm waiting for it, but suffice it to say, it was an experience and a half, and I stayed there way longer than I wanted to, and there were two key reasons why. Number one, I never stopped thinking that God wanted me there. And number two, the person sitting across the table from me was there for most of it. So tell the people how we met. How did this happen?
Well, we met at tryouts for a little band. What was it? Rock?
You should have started out with, we met in a freezer.
We met in a freezer.
We did. We met in a freezer.
We did. We met in a freezer because the school was built, they took over an old, Army hospital?
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, an old Army hospital. So we were kind of in the PX section, and they had walk-in freezers that were decommissioned, but people used them as practice rooms because they were soundproof. So we walked in a walk-in freezer and met each other.
Yeah. And I was not aware at the time that you were not in the band. I thought that you were there for practice and I was there to audition.
No, I just knew everybody in there because they were, I was older.
Yeah. You were a junior. I was a freshman. Prime jailbait. 17 years old. 17 and 20 respectively. So
scary.
Yeah, but it worked out, didn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it did.
We both got one really, really good thing out of that experience.
Yes.
And that was each other. So
yes,
yeah, that's
definitely.
Yeah, totally. But that was, the very first week on campus there, I had encountered certain people and certain attitudes that made me think, maybe, just maybe, this isn't the greatest of ideas for me, but I hadn't gotten any word from God that he didn't want me there anymore. Mm. And that was the real problem. God seemed to want me there. Well, by God, I guess I mean my youth pastor, because he's the only one that I had ever heard talk about this aside from myself. My mother was agreeable about it, but she never confirmed or denied whether or not she believed that there was any kind of divine call on my life. So I honestly have no idea what was going on in her head during any of that. All I know is that she pretty much went along with it. I sure could have used an adult in my life at that point. And my mother wouldn't have been it because she was as knee deep in this as I was. But I really could have used an adult in my life at that point, or even just a good friend with a better head on their shoulders to say to me, I am not 100% convinced that it's a good idea for you to be squandering your intellect in a place like that. I really don't think it's a good idea for you to abandon the idea of a job that could very easily and quickly turn into six figures and all kinds of security and early retirement for what you have right now at 48 years old, with just the slightest semblance of a career and very little else because of the time spent pursuing things that were absolutely, completely, and utterly pointless. Now, I don't fault myself for it. I've gone through the whole self-hate thing over the decisions that I've made. It's done. We are where we are right now. With all due respect, I kind of like the idea that I get up in the morning and go sell weed for a living. Okay? I kind of like the idea that I get to do this on Sunday, that I get to rise early on Sunday morning and just get people in touch with the sacred herb. I think that it's a wonderful thing that I do with my life. I think that it is a wonderful thing that I do both medically and recreationally for myself. And I think that it's wonderful that I get to sit here baked off my ass and talk to you people every week. Okay, so each of these episodes is going to have a main topic. And since this is the pilot, I came across an article from Huffington Post where the author basically states in the title that we have what's called a, quote, dumb religion problem in this country. And it's true. We do have a dumb religion problem in this country. But if you click through to the article, he gets a lot more specific in not just calling it a dumb religion problem, but identifying it point blank as an evangelical problem. And it's true. As much as I detest the Catholic Church and everything that it stands for, and the immeasurable number of lives that it has destroyed in various ways, and not just in sexual abuse, but that's a big one. So as much as you want to put the Catholic Church in the crosshairs, evangelical religion is involved in every last one of those things. You're just not hearing about it as much because there just isn't the same momentum. But there have been problems with sexual abuse in every evangelical organization out there, particularly one that I consider to be the most trustworthy. But the author refers to what's going on in this country as an evangelical problem, a dumb evangelical problem. Now, I don't want to get into name calling and that sort of thing. I don't want to parrot ideas here. I don't think that there's such a thing as a dumb evangelical. I think that there is definitely such a thing as an uninformed or misinformed evangelical. I know that there are, and I don't even want to use descriptors like narrow-minded, because most people don't understand or realize how narrow-minded they are when it comes to their religion, because it's all they've ever been taught. This is what I was talking about before in terms of being upset at the system and not the individual. This is an epidemic that has been brought upon us by generations of pride and arrogance and people wanting to be in control of other people. That is what religion is in a nutshell. It's a group of people who gain and maintain control over other people. So here are some of the things that make up this dumb religion problem. Number one is this necessity of moral absolutes in evangelical doctrine. There is only one way to get to heaven. There's only one way of thinking that is correct. There's only one way to view the Bible, and that is as the all-authoritative Word of God. And that's it, period, end of story. All kinds of absolutes. Sex before marriage is wrong. Abortion is wrong. There are so many of these gray areas that they try to make black and white that it makes it difficult to think about them from the standpoint of logic and reason. I still, as far as I've come, I still have issues with this. And I've been told recently that I have issues with seeing things in far too black and white terms. And that all goes back to the way that I was taught to think as an evangelical. Yes, I think in very black and white terms, but the thing that armored me through all of that and the thing that allowed me to find my way out was the fact that I never, ever, ever stopped questioning my own opinions about things. I never saw any of these things as absolute, even the ones that I claimed to agree with. I never saw as absolute. I never could understand how Christianity could possibly be the only way to get to God. If God created people with such a diversity of personalities and attitudes all over the world, people who have different ways, radically different ways of looking at the world, and yet we're all supposed to come together under this one cover. We're somehow supposed to find this needle in a haystack of world religions called Christianity and embrace it. So it's a twofold thing. It's not just a matter of finding it, it's a matter of finding it and embracing it. And if you can't find that needle because your brain is not wired for how to look for that needle, then what's your recourse? Well, your recourse, as far as they're concerned, is that you get to go to hell. Now, I'm not going to get too far off point with this either, but what kind of God does that sort of thing? What kind of God hides the truth in a way that you now have to go out and find and then accept? It makes absolutely no sense. For a God who wants to be known, who wants to have fellowship with his creation, this is how he goes about it. And the absolute nature of the belief that Christianity is the only way to get to God is by far the most toxic of the things that they believe, because it draws a line in the sand and says, we are right, everyone else is wrong. And that is a recipe for all kinds of bad things to happen. I don't care how many incidences you want to cite of anyone of Middle Eastern descent, of any Middle Eastern religion, doing something awful and terrible. I don't care how many of those examples you want to cite. Christianity has Islam beat by a country mile in terms of bloodshed and hate, by a country mile. And yes, I will absolutely qualify that statement in upcoming episodes, because we're going to talk about the origins of evangelical religion, the people who were involved, the things that were involved, the reasons why certain things came together. And it will be an eye-opener for anyone who has just spent the last 10 years sitting in a pew and doing nothing else. It will be an eye-opener. And that's not a slight, because that is what you're conditioned to do. You are conditioned to be a sheep. And if you became a sheep, guess what? Then your pastor was successful. You can say whatever you want to me about what you believe. Just please be ready to listen to my point of view. And if you're not, then don't bring it up. And I always approach people that way too when it comes to talking about my beliefs or their beliefs. I'm going to listen as well as talk. I'm not just going to start telling you why you're wrong. I'm going to listen. I'm going to see what bits of truth there are in what you're saying. And I'm going to say, well, okay, I can agree with this, but I can't agree with this. That's the way that it should be, okay? Not dealing solely in absolutes. Okay, so next one. This one's for you. Attitudes toward women. Now, I have told Shelle I'm going to give her the reins on a lot of these topics. I told her that she's going to have pretty much all the say in the women's issue stuff. And we're not going to try and steer the show in that direction, but when there's something significant to discuss, or when what we're discussing impacts women in particular, that's when you're going to probably hear more from Shelle. But just you got any? And are you brainstorming anything that you want to do with this at this point?
I was mainly thinking about how fundamentalists, especially fundamentalist Christians, think of women, and how their views of women are skewed in this particular direction. First, you have Paul saying that he won't let women teach in church or speak in church. And, people try to qualify it with, oh, that's because people were talking in the gallery or something like that. And it was specific to that church, but it's like, but you put,
Then where's that specific detail?
yes. And the people who gathered and canonized the Bible put this book in the Bible for a reason. They voted on it and they said, this is all true. This is all stuff we want in there. So if there was going to be a qualifier like that, I think they probably would have not put it in there in the first place.
No, probably not.
But the biggest thing here is Proverbs 31, which starts with, who is this, Lemuel? Yeah, King Lemuel, talking to his son and giving him all these ridiculous advice. And around verse 10, he starts describing the perfect woman. And a lot of women's groups in evangelical churches will be called far above rubies or something like that, because this is, that's what it starts off with. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. And it lists all of the qualities of this woman, who must also be superhuman because she is supposed to get up before everyone else and go to bed after everyone else is asleep. She's also supposed to cook all the meals and also grind all the flour and grow all the food and da-da-da-da. She's supposed to also earn money by selling things or doing stuff, because she's always supposed to be working. She never, ever takes time for herself. Her candle doesn't go out at night because she's still awake, spinning, weaving, and sewing. I'm not sure who this woman is, but man, she must have died young.
Yeah.
She gives to the poor. She clothes her household in scarlet. She makes coverings for the bed. Her husband is known at the gates because he's a great guy, but she just keeps on doing stuff. And then her children are supposed to rise up and call her blessed. And, well, that's about it. That's her reward, is that her husband said, "You did a good job, honey."
And the crazy part is that a lot of times that doesn't even happen, because
No.
what you just read there is a recipe for toxic masculinity.
Well, yes, because the woman is burdened with all of these responsibilities. And honestly, that particular passage is crazy making. It is crazy making. If you have any sort of mental illness or trouble just functioning in life, this can set you into a real, I have anxiety. And just the thought of trying to live up to that is crazy.
But
yeah.
I'm listening to that and I'm thinking, wasn't this like until maybe the early mid-ish 60s in this country? Wasn't that kind of the picture of what the housewife was anyway?
Yes.
You said, that's the thing. These concepts are actually contemporary.
Yes.
And it hasn't been long since we started as a society thinking differently
Right.
than that. Because look at the June Cleaver trope.
Yeah.
There's that.
Yeah.
The stereotypical housewife. You see this all through older sitcoms. You see it in Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, Make Room for Daddy. All of these old shows kind of mimicked.
Yeah.
That.
Oh, yeah.
Because
She was supposed to know everything.
she was supposed to know everything. She was supposed to do everything.
Yes. And it's crazy making. It's a lot.
And when she finally does get to go to bed, well, guess what? It's time to add to the quiverful now.
There are things.
My goodness.
Well, see, when we were in college, they were starting to tell us that the pill was an abortifacient. Mm-hmm. And we were terrified to use the pill.
But even as young evangelicals, what happened? We went to see your gyno, both of us.
Yes.
Went to your gynecologist. And what did he say?
He said, "No, it doesn't. We would tell you if it did. It does not."
No.
And he was like, "How did you get that idea?"
If I understand it, and I'm okay with being corrected here, but I'm pretty sure that what he said at the time was that the pill, what it does is it just keeps the egg from implanting.
Yes.
And it just gets flushed, and that's it.
Some people think that is an abortion. It is not.
Now, is there a remote chance that that egg could be fertilized before it makes its way out? Well, yes, but it won't make a difference if it doesn't implant.
Right.
So
it happens millions of times a day to a million women.
Yeah. But here's the thing. These Bronze Age humans that wrote that book didn't even have a base understanding of really where babies came from. Do you understand that we're talking about people who, for literally thousands of years, believed that men shot tiny little babies out of their penises that grew up inside of women? That was their normal belief for a long time.
Right.
Well, we know better now. Can we start acting like we know better now?
Well, and also there's the fact that in Old Testament traditions, like girl babies, you are twice as unclean as, when you gave birth to a girl baby, you are twice as unclean as if you gave birth to a boy baby,
And aren't you unclean for like a week after your period is over?
Yeah,
you're
something like that.
So for half your life,
you're
basically,
unclean.
You're unclean because you got that week when you have your period. Then you've got the week after that you have to go through whatever fucking rituals you have to go through to cleanse.
Yeah, and how did they get anything done? How did anybody get anything done if you're basically, in seclusion for like 2 weeks out of every month?
And how long were they allowed to lie down after they gave birth? I mean, you read that passage, and this person would have to be superhuman. Now, there are those who will argue that it's poetic, that it's overstated, it's caricaturish. Well, no, it really isn't.
It really isn't, because it's like a lot of people in certain movements in evangelical Christianity require their wives to work that way. They require their wives to make all the clothes for the family. They require their wives to bake the bread and cook all the food and have as many children as it is possible for one body to give birth to.
We saw it. We saw it more than once.
Oh, yeah.
And it was amazing to me. These people who can barely afford to put food on their table, but they've got 5 kids and the equivalent of a pickup truck to drive them around in.
Yeah.
Because there's so many of them and they can't afford a late model minivan. And why do you keep bringing people into this world that you can't take care of? Well, because it's God's will. Okay. Could I see that in writing? Well, no, I don't mean from your Bible. I mean something that actually shows that this is something you were said to do. Just keep having babies that you can't afford, that society is now going to have to pay for, because this is something that God wanted. Well, if God wants it, can he rain down some money from heaven like he rained down manna for the Israelites? I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
If this is God's will, then how come he's not involved?
Yeah. But the treatment of women in the church is deplorable. It's deplorable. And I've met female preachers, but they are in no way treated the same way as male preachers. There's a lot less churches that are willing to open their doors to a female preacher. And the fact that, they will advise women to stay with abusive husbands. They will advise women to not argue with their husbands if their husband is doing something wrong.
And stop right there. Okay. And if that is you, if that in any way, shape, or form describes what goes on in your house and describes what is being discussed between you and your Christian counselor, seculartherapyproject.org.
Definitely.
Hit pause, go to your browser, find yourself a counselor who is going to give you sound advice about your situation.
Oh, yeah.
Find yourself a counselor who will tell you what you need to hear about the situation that you are in. Find someone who isn't afraid to tell you to leave. Find someone who isn't afraid to tell you that this is an awful situation for your children and that you need to get out.
And P.S. also will tell you that you do not have demons because you are depressed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's that.
I've had several quote unquote demons cast out of me because I had anxiety and depression, but I had demons. So I never got help for that until I was at least, I think I was 40.
At least.
40 something, 42.
At least.
So, yeah, that was a lot of years of pain.
So, yeah, I wound up in therapy for the first time in 2013. So that would have made me, 42, 41 for most of that year, I think. Yeah. So we both got help late, but we started getting help, and that's what's most important. And it wasn't through a priest or a pastor or someone in our church. It was through licensed therapists who are able to take an objective and secular approach. I'm certain that my therapist doesn't like everything he hears in session, but I've never once been told what to do by him. I've never once been told to deal with a problem by praying about it. And I've never once had Bible verses quoted at me as a means of solving my problem. So if these things are happening in your so-called therapy, once again, seculartherapyproject.org. It will be in the show notes. If you don't want to stop and look right now, that's fine. Go to our blog and take a look at the show notes for this episode. It will be in there, and it is something that you need to do today. So I just want to end off the show with a couple of parting thoughts here. And I actually posted this a while ago on social media, not that long ago, maybe 3 or 4 months. And it was in response to someone on one of the atheist groups that I interact on, posting this. It wasn't really a meme. It was more of like an infographic on why certain authorities within the Catholic Church believe that people are leaving the church. Of course, they have to divert attention away from all the sex abuse stuff and come up with different reasons. But as I'm reading this, these were the thoughts that came into my head, and this was what I posted as a response. And it was about people leaving the church. Now, yes, this is about specifically the Catholic Church, which they identify themselves as evangelical. They don't fit the mode or the mold of evangelical in terms of like a born again religion, but that's how they identify. And I think that whatever branch of Christianity you want to look at, you're going to find nothing but corruption from top to bottom in every corner and every crevice. And it doesn't matter what denomination we're dealing with, whether it's the Catholics, the Baptists, or any evangelical organization that you want to name. I think that it is uniformly true that there is a cancer running through it. And you can't rehabilitate a cancer. You have to cut it out. You have to cut it out of your life, out of your thoughts, out of everything. And people are. And it's becoming apparent that people are leaving the church, but the reasons that they give for it are bullshit. And this was my response. People are leaving the church because they're tired of defending the perversions of old men and of supplicating to a God who never answers their prayers or shows any demonstration of the power he's alleged to possess, particularly against those perverted old men or to protect their victims. They're tired of being asked to continually fund goings-on of an organization that does nothing to better society but goes out of its way to destroy young lives at the folly of the men who destroy them. They're tired of aligning with an organization that preaches in an increasingly hateful rhetoric of intolerance and bigotry. Oh, and they're leaving the church because they want to be left alone in their bedrooms and left alone to decide what happens before, during, and after they've been there with someone else. In short, people are leaving the church because they see through the facade. They're understanding that we need to stop focusing on Bronze Age concepts like sin and simply purpose to do the right thing as a matter of moral principle. We don't need a homily, a candle, and a cookie. We need to be able to think for ourselves and act according to what our advanced intellect tells us is right. the evangelical mindset, whether it's intentional or not, is at its heart a vehicle for hate. There's no possible way that you could look at the actions of the Old Testament Yahweh and see anything but utter depravity in the way that he deals with his creation. There's no way to see love. There's nowhere where you can read that he loves you. I don't know if you understand this or not, but there are plenty of verses in the Bible where other people talk about God's love, but you can't find a single one where he looks at an individual and literally just says, I love you, and as your heavenly Father, I want you to be safe and secure and happy and all the normal things that any normal parent wants for their kid. You don't get that. You don't even get an I love you. I dare you to prove me wrong. I dare you to find any verse that says in any way, shape, or form from the source, not someone else saying it, but God himself saying it, that he loves you in any way, shape, or form. You're a plaything, and that is all you are for him. And that is all you will ever be in the grand scheme of things, because even your eternity is going to be spent in a constant state of subservience. Heaven and hell, they're just photonegatives of each other. Hell is a photonegative of heaven. And either you're going to serve, either you're going to be submissive to this miscreant God in a way that is pleasing or in a way that's not. It's just a photonegative. So this amazing eternity that you're buying for yourselves, just read your own book. Read the book and understand what it is that you are letting this religion consume your life to have. Just educate yourself, and we'll educate you too, because guess what? We got all kinds of time and all kinds of energy and all kinds of drive to make sure that we keep doing this and that we keep putting the truth out there in a way that, at least to use evangelical terminology, plants seeds. That's what I'm trying to do here, is plant a few seeds, get you to think about the things that you believe, because I'll bet dollars to donuts that a lot of the stuff that you will hear during this podcast are things that you've heard but haven't really thought about. Well, guess what? It's time to think about them, and it's time to get unbound. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Unbound. Show topics are chosen based on their timeliness, relevance, and social impact. If you have suggestions for future episodes, please email us at unbound.podcast.network@gmail.com. Please don't forget to like, share, and throw a few 5-star ratings our way. Follow us on all major social platforms, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Links to our social pages, as well as a full list of cited sources in today's episode, are listed in the show notes available on our website. That's getunbound.org, get-unbound.org. If you value this resource and you want to see it continue, please consider supporting us on Patreon at the link in the show description. And be sure to check for new episodes every Sunday, when we'll take one more step toward getting and staying unbound.